the ancient drum. Mika Rainbird's heart skipped a beat when she first saw the drum. It sat innocently among other artifacts in the newly acquired Thompson collection, but there was nothing innocent about it. The elk-hide surface was worn smooth by generations of ceremonial use, its cedar frame darkened with age and sacred smoke. The paintings along its side, red ochre symbols of lightning and rain clouds, seemed to shift in the museum's sterile light, as if trying to speak in a language she had almost forgotten. Her fingers twitched with muscle memory, recalling summer evenings spent watching her grandmother paint similar symbols on smaller drums. "Every line tells a story," she would say, her aged hands steady as prairie grass. "Every color carries a voice." The climate-controlled air felt too thin in her lungs as she leaned closer. The distinctive mark near the base confirmed her fears. A small thunderbird, wings spread in eternal flight. She knew this drum. Not personally, but through her grandmother's stories, told during long winter nights when the wind howled outside their reservation home, like lonely spirits seeking shelter. This was Standing Thunder, the drum that had disappeared from her tribe 70 years ago during the ghost dance ceremony. The drum that was said to hold the voices of the ancestors. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. The old ones say Standing Thunder wasn't just taken, little bird. It was stolen at the most dangerous moment, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when our people were calling to the spirits for strength. The ceremony was never completed, the gateway never properly closed. Extraordinary piece, isn't it? Dr. Harrison's voice made her jump. The department head adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, peering at the drum with the detached interest of an academic. Early 19th century, possibly older. The preservation is remarkable. He reached toward it with manicured fingers. "Don't." Mika stopped herself, forcing her voice to remain professional. "The oils from our hands could damage it." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. The truth, that no one should touch a sacred drum without proper preparation, would sound too superstitious in these halls of science and preservation. Harrison nodded approvingly. "Always the conservator, that's why you're perfect for this project. I want it as the centerpiece for our new Native American spirituality exhibit. The lunar eclipse next week would make a perfect opening night." The first incident occurred 3 days before the eclipse. James, the night security guard, waited for her by the staff entrance, his dark face troubled in the early morning light. His hands shook as he described the sounds he'd heard during his rounds, a rhythmic beating that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I've worked security for 15 years, he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Museums have their own kind of quiet at night, but this was different. This was alive." "Listen," he said, pulling up the security footage. The video showed empty halls, but when he turned up the volume, Mika heard it, a deep, steady pulse like 1,000 distant heartbeats merging into one. The sound made the hair on her arms rise. The next day, a school group toured the preparation room. As they passed the drum, all 20 children stopped mid-sentence, heads tilted in perfect unison. Their eyes grew distant, focused on something only they could see. The teacher called 3 times before they responded, and when they did, their voices had changed, deeper, older somehow. A little girl with braided hair lingered behind. "They're hungry," she whispered, pressing close to Mika. "The ones in the drum. They've been hungry for such a long time." Her small hand was cold as winter stone when she touched Mika's wrist. "They remember you, from before, from the time of dancing." That evening, as Mika worked late, other artifacts began to respond. A bone whistle keened softly in its case. Strings on a displayed guitar vibrated without being touched. A collection of ancient rattles began to shake, their dried seeds whispering secrets in forgotten languages. From Standing Thunder came a deep resonance that made her bones ache with recognition. The Thunderbird design seemed to pulse with each beat, its wings stretching wider with every passing moment. When she checked her phone, she had missed calls from her grandmother. The 7th came as she watched, but she let it ring. Some truths were too terrifying to face. The night of the eclipse arrived with a sky like polished obsidian. Her footsteps echoing strangely, each step seeming to echo longer than it should, as if the sound was being answered from somewhere deep below the building's foundation. Standing thunder dominated the central display, spotlights casting uncertain shadows that moved against the light. The Thunderbird design no longer pretended to be mere paint. Its wings beat slowly, sending ripples across the drum's surface like wind over water. The temperature dropped until her breath clouded the air, carrying the scent of sage and wood smoke. The first shadow touched the moon at 9:47 p.m. Standing Thunder's initial beat was barely a whisper, more felt than heard. But then it came again, and again, a rhythm old as memory, pulling at something deep in her blood. The tempo matched her heartbeat perfectly, and she realized with sudden clarity that it wasn't calling to her. It was calling through her, using her living pulse as a bridge between worlds. Other artifacts awakened. Bone whistles screamed like winter wind, strings sang war songs, rattles chattered like death drums. The ceiling lights flickered and died, replaced by an otherworldly phosphorescence that turned the air the color of old bones. They emerged first as smoke, thin tendrils that leaked from the walls like dark water. But the smoke had purpose, had form, had hunger. It gathered into shapes that walked like men but were not men, wore the faces of ancestors but were not ancestors. Their regalia was woven from shadow and starlight, their drums made from the spaces between heartbeats. At the center of it all, Standing Thunder pulsed with internal fire. Each beat sent shockwaves of color through the room, colors that had no names in any human tongue. The drum's surface split like an opening eye, and from that dark pupil poured the voices of the forgotten, the lost, the ones who had waited 70 years to finish their interrupted song. Their songs shaking centuries of dust from the ceiling. Display cases exploded inward, glass turning to diamond dust in the air. Alarms screamed and died, their electronic wails devoured by older, deeper sounds. The spirits moved through the museum like a river of shadows, their forms shifting between human and animal, between flesh and smoke. In the chaos, Mika heard her grandmother's voice cutting through the din. The drum was stolen before the ceremony could end. The gateway never closed. Now they come hungry, little bird. Hungry for the songs that were stolen from them. Understanding hit her like Arctic wind. Standing Thunder hadn't been just any ceremonial drum. It had been the anchor point for the ghost dance, the rhythm that maintained balance between worlds. When it was stolen, the ceremony was interrupted. The gateway was left open, leaving the spirits trapped between worlds. Neither living nor dead, neither here nor there. The shadows swirled faster, their songs becoming screams. The temperature dropped until metal groaned and water pipes burst, spraying ice crystals instead of liquid. The spirit's rage took physical form. Frost patterns that looked like screaming faces spread across every surface. The very air seemed to crystallize, making each breath painful. They would destroy everything, starting with the museum that had kept their drum captive. Through the chaos, Mika saw the truth. These weren't evil spirits, but lost ones, wounded ones. Spirits that had been trapped between worlds for 70 years, unable to complete their journey, unable to find peace. Something inside her shifted, like ice breaking up on a spring river. Her grandmother's teachings surfaced in her mind, not just the words, but the feelings behind them. The way her grandmother's voice would change when she spoke of the old ways, becoming something ancient and powerful. She approached Standing Thunder, no longer caring about preservation protocol or museum regulations. The drum's surface burned cold under her fingers, but its rhythm matched her heartbeat. When she began to sing, it was with her grandmother's voice, with her mother's voice, with the voices of all the women in her family who had kept the old songs alive. The first spirit turned toward her, a warrior made of smoke and starlight, his face both young and ancient. Others followed, their forms steadying, becoming more distinct. They gathered around her in a circle, their own drums beginning to match her rhythm. The song rose from somewhere deeper than memory. It spoke of home and return, of paths lost and found, of doors that needed closing and new ones that waited to open. As she sang, the spirits began to dance. Not in rage now, but in ceremony. The proper ceremony, the one that should have happened 70 years ago. Dawn found Mika seated cross-legged on the museum floor, her voice raw, her hands blistered but still moving on the drum's surface. Standing Thunder sat silent before her, its Thunderbird design now still, at peace. The air smelled of sage and summer rain, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a closing door. The museum bore no physical evidence of the night's events, no broken glass, no frost, no scattered artifacts. Only the security footage would show 7 hours of static, and her resignation letter would provide no real explanation for why the drum must be returned to the tribe. But she felt the change in her bones. In choosing the spirits over the museum, she had finally chosen herself. The next morning, she would begin the process of repatriation, not just for Standing Thunder, but for all the sacred items in the collection that called to her with newfound voices. That night, for the first time in years, she called her grandmother. The old woman answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Little bird," she said softly, "you heard them singing." "Yes," Mika whispered. "I heard them. I finally heard them." In her dreams that night, the thunder was a lullaby, and all the ancient songs led home.